The Power of Agile, hosted by Nagaro.
Welcome to The Power of Agile, the podcast where we explore how organizations stay adaptive, resilient, and human in a world that refuses to slow down. Today's conversation is especially timely because businesses everywhere are facing pressure from every direction, whether that's economic uncertainty, AI disruption, changing customer expectations, leadership fatigue, and constant transformation. To help us unpack what separates organizations that can truly adapt from those that struggle under pressure, I'm joined by Evan Leybourn, who is the co-founder of the Business Agility Institute and head of research, an organization that has spent years researching how modern organizations evolve, respond to uncertainty, and build lasting adaptability. Today, we're going beyond agile frameworks and ceremonies. We're talking about organizational reflexes, leadership behavior under stress, decision-making, AI, and what business agility actually looks like when conditions get difficult. So a very warm welcome to you today, Evan.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. And before we get stuck into these topics now, it would be great if you could just tell us a bit about yourself, perhaps throw in a fun fact.
Of course. Well, I'm speaking to you from not so sunny Melbourne, Australia, land of fantastic coffee, but terrible weather. Very much, I think, like the UK at the moment, though, just the opposite side of the world and the opposite season at the moment. Fun fact. Here we go. My first job was to dress up in a koala costume and harass tourists for donations for the Wilderness Society. So I think, I don't know if I've come a long way, but I certainly use those skills on a regular basis, I have to say.
Sounds like you lived and breathed Agile way sooner than we thought.
Oh, most certainly true. Most certainly.
Great. Okay. And now let's get stuck in, right? So straight into the topic now. What kind of pressure are organizations under right now? And why does it matter so much for business agility?
So we've seen trends, economic trends, global economic trends. We've seen shifts in technological innovation. We've seen shifts in the geopolitical situation. And of course, we've seen generational change as different as Gen Alpha and before them Gen Z entered the workforce. Each of these has brought with it new challenges, new dynamics, new patterns that organizations haven't quite figured out yet. And the speed at which these changes are impacting on organizations is certainly, so I would say, much greater than ever before. Now, a lot of that is somewhat cliched. I don't think I've said anything that you or any of your listeners haven't heard before. What I would highlight, though, is that one of the big shifts that we have both seen and that we are trying to communicate is we want organizations to move beyond thinking about becoming future-proof. And this is a challenge, I think, with a lot of organizations. They go, we want to be future-proof, as in like waterproof. They want to protect the future from getting in. They want to keep doing what they're currently doing in spite of the future, in spite of whatever the future brings. Instead, organizations around the world really need to start becoming tomorrow ready or future ready. They need to be able to adapt and embrace to meet the future, to meet whatever tomorrow brings head on with the capabilities internally, with the people across their organization, and to meet what the customers of today and the customers of tomorrow are going to expect. And that, my friend, is probably one of the biggest shifts and the biggest challenges facing organizations right now.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you on that. And I'm just wondering, as a follow-on, do you think the organizations are struggling more with the pace of change itself or with their inability to respond to change effectively?
Almost certainly the latter. Humans, we are naturally adaptive. As a species, that's probably one of our greatest strengths. We adapt to whatever environment we exist within. It's not without stress and it's not without challenges, don't get me wrong. But organizations have certainly through the 19th and early 20th century, really built this mindset of predictability and stability. They've designed management frameworks and management models from, say, scientific management and the early attempts at globalization and industrialization. I don't mean industrial revolution, I mean 20th century industrialization. And a lot of what really occurred during that time was this fake confidence, this fake predictability, because change wasn't quite as rapid. In some cases it was. Of course, you have massive world wars, you have massive impact across organizations and individuals, but people could sort of get away with a little bit more rigidity in what they do. But 21st century, certainly from 2010 onwards, that really was no longer possible. To be fair, I don't think it ever was possible, but that's really what we're facing. That's what every organization is facing today. It's not the change, it's not even the pace of change. It's just we've built systems that can't handle it.
Yes. And do you think that when organizations then face real pressure, like what would you say, what kind of behaviors do they exhibit? And does that show whether they're truly agile?
You are talking my language, the B word, behaviors, because we do behavioral research. We have studied 2,500 organizations, and the vast majority of those studies were behavioral studies. And when we talk about business agility, we're not talking about agile. We're not talking about practices or frameworks. We're not even talking about mindset, that is a major part of it. Ultimately, it comes down to behavior. If you act with agility, you have agility. The mechanism to achieving it is much less relevant than most individuals, most people think. And I think that's one of the big shifts that's really occurred in the last, say, 15 years, where we look at organizations, where we look at those organizations who are responding well, is that they have created that behavioral change across their teams, across the staff in their organization. And they've built the mechanisms by which those behaviors can be established sustainably. The organizations that have underperformed, both in terms of agility, business agility, but also just in terms of market responsiveness and market returns, usually have behaviors that are outdated for the market and or the operations that they're trying to conduct today. And it takes time to reskill, to change behaviors. It's not a matter of saying, Gurpreet, you have to act differently today. You have to do something different. You have to behave different. You can't just tell someone to behave different. It requires systems to change. Policies and procedures of the organization need to support those behaviors. And I can tell many stories where they don't, and it goes horribly, horribly wrong. And on top of that, it requires the leaders to create an environment where those behaviors are truly incentivized, truly expected. And we look at organizational KPIs, for example. Most organizations will have financial KPIs or productivity KPIs. How many widgets did you produce last quarter? How many new accounts did you open last quarter? There's nothing wrong with those in principle. But the problem is they drive the wrong behaviors usually. Nobody ever gets fired for not achieving a particular behavioral score. Did you act in a way? But you do get fired if you don't make your numbers this quarter. And so that drives the behavior, no matter what they say. The leaders say, we want to be customer centric, we want to be collaborative. But when the incentives are the opposite of that, in conflict to those behaviors, I mean, you don't get the behaviors. Full stop.
You've hit the nail on the head, because I always thought about structure, hierarchical structures, those companies that are less adaptive to change, slow to release things to market, for example. But it's true, it all comes down to incentivization, right? And so I guess it almost sounds like stress becomes the real test of agility in this case, which creates an interesting contradiction. And going into that a bit more, then, why do you think many organizations appear agile during growth periods, right? But they then become centralized and a lot slower and risk averse during stressful times?
I'll give you two answers, which actually are the same answer at their root, and that is answer number one. Right? Leaders revert back to behaviors that they feel safe with. So they create these environments, they create these behaviors, and they create a culture that is collaborative and empowering. But then finances go south. It's you lose major clients. Something happens, not necessarily your fault, completely out of your hands. The global economy is just weird right now. And so the leaders get worried and their boss starts pushing and they fall back into these micromanagement. It's like I need a status report each week, each month to say, how are we doing? Because I'm afraid. These are fear-based responses more often than not.
Right.
Now, the second answer is that the behavioral changes were never made sustainably. They were new process, right? Let's take an agile, capital A, agile transformation. You introduce Scrum, you do sprints, you do retrospectives, and you create the machinery of an iterative, customer-centric product development process. Great, right? Looks fine, but fundamentally the incentives, the processes behind those processes, the performance management processes, the recruitment processes do not support agility. They do not support what it is that you put in place. So when things start to get a little bit squirrely, right? You basically built this transformation, you built these new behaviors on sand. And so the foundation shakes and it all comes tumbling down. I said that they're the same answer at the end of the day, because it's the leaders who create those processes. It's leaders who do not truly buy into the changes that need to be made. The leaders who are always create a sort of a little bit of a safety net. So that, we don't know if this is going to work. So I have my way back into micromanagement, into authoritarian leadership, if it doesn't work. And they pull that cord, they fall back as soon as anything gets just a little bit weird.
It really does all stem from the top now. And you mentioned this fear-based culture. I just had a slight follow-on from that. Do you think agility is easier when the business environment is forgiving?
So that's a good question, actually, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. What I will say is that agility is best when the business environment is ambiguous. Right? So I'm not quite answering. I will answer your question, but I'm going to take a circuitous route to it.
Sure.
The higher the risk, the higher the uncertainty of outcome, the more appropriate and the better agility is. If you have a highly predictable environment with a high cost of change, then you don't want agility. You want a degree of clarity going in. We're going to build X. And let's just take building a bridge, for example. I mean, once the concrete starts pouring, there's really not much you can do. I mean, the cost of change there is too great. And at the same time, the outcome is very predictable. You start pouring that concrete, you know you're going to get a bridge that goes from one side of the river to the other. I mean, you don't really have much ambiguity in this case, output. Now, there is still ambiguity because of the business level. When we look at this more holistically, how many cars are going over? Is it a toll road? Or how much revenue are you going to get? Are people going to actually go over the bridge, or are they going to go a different route that's a kilometer longer because it's cheaper? Like, how are your customers going to change their behaviors? You don't know that. So even in environments where some things might look predictable, the reality is it's often not as predictable as you may think. But the reason why I sort of go there is that when we look at the environments where organizations can be most effective and where we see agility to be most effective, it definitely comes from those environments where leaders create the space for their people to achieve the best, to do the best job of their lives, right? And we talk about empowerment, and it's a nice, it fills you with the warm and fuzzies. It's a good word. We like the word empowerment, but we always need to balance empowerment with accountability. Empowerment without accountability is laissez-faire. Accountability without empowerment is command and control. So you need to create a degree of balance there. You need to have a degree of tension, that sort of creative, enabling constraint that lets people focus. We're trying to achieve this. The worst thing that you can do for innovation, the worst thing that you can do for creativity is give someone or a team or an organization infinite money. I used to work for a natural resources organization. This is more than that, almost 20 years ago. And they had more money than God. And so they were very, very happy to throw money at any single problem that they had. But it meant that, and we counted once, this is before business agility was really a thing. But to get a project started required, I think it was 380 something signatures.
Wow.
And they were okay with that because they could just throw more money at things. And that's fine right up until the commodities price tanked. And suddenly they didn't have that sort of money, and efficiency and creativity became required. Now, the organization didn't have the muscle memory. They didn't know how to adapt. And that was, they did eventually adapt, but it definitely took them a long time.
Wow. 386 signatures. Okay. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
And some of these were wet signatures. You required physical pen on paper signatures, not even digital ones. That was fun.
That must have taken forever for projects to start there.
No, sincerely, there was one project that was sort of a fairly simple systems upgrade in technology. It was honestly just a couple of weeks' work, but it took over 9 months to get the project started because of their process. The project management overhead was like 7 to 8 times what the cost of the project was. Now, that's an extreme case, but that's definitely gives you that example of the kind of challenges that organizations face.
Yeah, it definitely puts it into perspective. And so going into that a bit more now, so what kind of patterns would you say you've seen within the Business Agility Institute, right? What kind of patterns have you seen that organizations consistently do to remain adaptable during uncertain times? That was a mouthful.
It's a tricky question, but I get you. One of so we do research. So let me talk about the study that we did last year, which was the Business Agility Report. Now, we do this every year, so this is the year number, I want to say 7th or 8th. I think it's the 8th time we've done it, just to be fun. Now, we've seen trends change over that time. We saw from 2018, 19, 20, we saw steady improvements in business agility across the board. The demand for agility and the expectations and the investment and the behavioral changes that organizations, we saw sort of steadily increase. Then the pandemic hit and those increases continued. There was disruption, of course, but the need for agility was even more. The need for these behaviors was greater than it had been. And so organizations continued to improve in collaboration, in the way that they operated. 2023, on the other hand, saw a massive drop. The pandemic was over. And the companies started to pull back on promises made during the pandemic. And obviously the obvious one is like return to office. I think we can all remember back in the days of like 2021, 2022, when the leaders were like, work from home is amazing. We're going to keep doing this even once the pandemic's over. It's cheaper for us. It's better for us. Employee engagement is up. Satisfaction is up. And don't get me wrong. It's like the data does show that there are positives and negatives to work from home. Right? There is disadvantages to working from home. So this is not a simple case of work from home good, return to office bad, or vice versa. It is a complex problem. But the promise was made that we're going to do this. And then all of a sudden you get, no, we're going to come back to the office. This is also the period where you get mass layoffs. Now, don't get me wrong, there were layoffs during the pandemic. But if you got laid off, you knew why. It sucked. Yeah. It was horrible. But everyone was in this together, even if you lost your job. 2023, on the other hand, it felt like I've stuck with you through the pandemic. I've supported you. I haven't had a pay rise. I've worked long hours. And now you're laying me off. And so there was this massive pushback where the employee engagement tanked. The collaboration between areas tanked as leaders and individuals built walls and silos around their function to protect their teams from the layoffs that were sweeping organizations. So we saw massive drop in agility and business agility against all the capabilities, all the behaviors that we measure. And for reference, we measure against 18 capabilities and 85 behaviors. At the time, 84. Now, in all of that, we then saw 2024 growth again. We saw organizations realize the pendulum had swung too far, and so they started to push back towards business agility. They started to push back towards some of these improvements. They didn't obviously get as good as they would have liked, but there were improvements. Then 25 saw a drop again, not as much, right? But again, more of a drop. So we've gone from having like 5 years of steady increase, year on year, different and better than the year before, to having now 4 years of up, down, up, down, up, down. And the volatility in the market, the volatility in organizations is there in our data. It is so clear to see just that organizations all over the place are organizations all over the place are all over the place. They don't know what they're doing. What we do see in terms of the 2025 stats, and this goes up to December 2025, is that organizations are making trade-off decisions more deliberately. So what they're investing in, what behaviors and what capabilities they're trying to develop is a very deliberate choice. What's interesting here is that for the first time ever, leadership behaviors have been deprioritized, right? We would have expected that historically leadership has always invested in leadership. But this year is the first year where it's taken a hit, a greater hit than the other behaviors that we're measuring. So read into that what you will. I mean, it is a singular data point. We're waiting on the data to come through this year to really look at whether this is an anomaly or whether this is a trend, but it is certainly an interesting data point nonetheless. So yeah, I could keep rambling on for ages, but they're the sort of shifts and trends that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's very interesting, especially around the leadership trend. If you had to summarize then, right? So in the most recent Business Agility Institute report, what surprised you the most in the research findings?
What surprised me the most? That's a very good question.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
So what surprised me in 2024, I'll tell you what surprised me, because 2025 validated it as well. The biggest surprise we've had is something that we've sort of been looking for. So I'm one of the co-founders of the Business Agility Institute. Myself and Ahmed Sidki, we started this organization back in 2017. And in 2017, we've just run the Business Agility Conference. We formed this organization. And the question I've been asked ever since was, can you prove to me that business agility is going to help my business? Now, that's very hard to answer. Right? We can say that it's going to increase employee engagement. I've had that data since day one. Right? That's easy to say. I can say that your customer resonance, your ability to create more resonant products and services will increase. Absolutely. We've known that from day one. But how does that translate to higher revenues, profitability? That's really hard to measure. So in 24, we looked deep into, can we correlate between, and I will be clear, correlation, not causation here, but can we correlate between increasing levels of business agility and increasing revenues? And we did. Right? There was a 23% gap between organizations who saw decreasing levels of business agility over a 7-year period saw their revenues increase by 8% on average. Right?
Wow.
So
Okay.
still an increase. Business agility didn't make it better. Right?
Yeah.
If you're not an agile, you're still going to make money. Right? But organizations who saw their business agility levels increase over that same period saw a 31% increase in revenues, technically revenue per employee, a 23% gap between the two. And that was a surprise. The fact, we've always hoped that this was the case. We've always hoped that there was a relationship between revenue and business agility. We know it is a good thing for engagement and empowerment. We know it's good for the customers, but to be able to say that it's good for the bottom line as well, that's the feather in the cap that we needed. And so this year, I think the surprise was we revalidated that. Numbers, percentages were slightly different, of course, because we have a different sample sets and different organizations. And of course, the economy is just weird, right?
Yeah.
But same levels of same relationships between business agility and revenue. So that's definitely one of, I think, the best things that we've found in the recent years.
Certainly, that's quite a significant difference as well. So the fact that you've been able to show a positive correlation there is definitely useful for companies when they do doubt that side, right? And now to go into the hot topic, right? We know organizations are trying to navigate all of this while simultaneously dealing with AI.
Yep.
Now, is AI making organizations more adaptive, or is it just faster at making the same old mistakes?
Pretty much the latter. So we did a piece of research last year that looked exactly at this. And what we found is that the vast majority of organizations who were investing in AI were not seeing a positive return on investment. We're not the only ones who have that research. There's studies out from HBR, and McKinsey did a study, and there's heaps of studies about return on investment here. Now, what we also looked at is what was it that was causing this? And we looked at what were the top constraints, limitations that stopped an organization from seeing a positive return on investment. And out of the top constraints, only one related to technology, and that was around data quality, like garbage in, garbage out. All of the other constraints related to the business environment that the AI system existed within. Right? And so all of the benefits, all of the speed was being lost, absorbed by the organizational bureaucracy. It's like putting a Ferrari engine in a bus chassis in the streets of Bangalore. You're going nowhere very quickly. Right?
Yeah.
I also like to think of it as, if you're expecting AI to help you create value 3 times faster, can your leaders make decisions 3 times faster? And decision-making and leadership decision-making was one of the constraints. And the answer was no. For most organizations, they could not. So you have this engine able to create value really quickly. And of course, how you define that's another matter.
Yeah.
But their ability to see that value, non-existent. And if we go back to the world of agile, not business agility now, but agile. If your organization couldn't do agile, you're not going to see the value from AI. Right? The interface points, the way that an organization operates, whether it's through agility or through AI augmentation, is more or less the same. It has the same pattern, the same shape inside an organization. If you can't do one, you can't do the other. And this has been a surprise, I think, for some organizations. The other thing that I'll just quickly mention here, and I used the word augmentation a moment ago, and I just want to be very, very clear what I'm referring to. The research that we did, and again, this is now a year and a half. Oh, no, just over a year. It's about 14 months old. But the key point of this research, where we looked at it, was organizations that used AI to automate their workforces, in to replace humans. Right? Yeah. None of the organizations we studied, right, 0% saw a positive return on investment. Some actually saw a negative return. They actually lost value. Right? Yeah. They made mistakes. Now, technology moves on, and agentic this and agentic that, and okay, right? the data that I'm talking about may be different. Oh no, it will be different in 2027 than it was in 2025. But as it currently stands, with the best information that we have, organizations that see a positive return on investment are those that augment their workforce. Right? They create a hybrid rather than to automate and replace the human in the system. There is an entire set of research behind how you do that well. Right? And what skills you need, how you create, how you stop the human in the loop from going rogue and just getting fatigued and just accepting blindly what AI says. Because if something's right 95% of the time, it's sometimes hard to spot the 5% where it's completely off base. But this is where those skills and those capabilities that we need to develop in our staff come into play. So I won't go into that topic because that's entirely different. We could spend another half hour just talking about that. But I just wanted to highlight the importance here of the human in the system, because it is not an automation conversation, and it cannot be.
Definitely. I completely agree with you there. I do think, the AI coming onto the scene has just made the feedback loop a lot faster, right? And there's actual, let's say, quality gates that need to be in play, which when you refer to human in the loop, that's the way I would see it, in terms of actually validating what's coming back and actually looking at, does that fit? Does that apply to our scenario? A slight follow on from that then, it's evident that technology matters, but leadership behavior still seems central to all of this. So my question is, what leadership behaviors become most important given AI and this changing landscape that we have today?
So, I mean, that is a tough one. So partly because there's so many. I will highlight two, and I won't say these are the most important because it depends on the context, depends on who the leader is and the context they're operating within. But I'll talk about the two that are generally the worst rated behaviors in the research that we do. So these are behaviors that leaders generally do poorly. So the first one is around a topic we spoke about earlier, empowerment with accountability. And when we often go in and we interview leaders and we talk to leaders, and they will complain. They will say, I'm trying to delegate, but my teams, this person, these people, they're not taking ownership. Right? And that is probably one of the most common complaints that I hear. And when we look at those organizations, their HR functions, their L&D functions put lots of investment into teaching leaders how to delegate, how to create an empowering environment. All good practices, everything that we want to see. But no one is teaching the individuals how to take ownership. And that is a skill just as much as delegation is a skill. And that gap is causing this tension of leaders who are frustrated that people aren't taking ownership. So it's like, well, have you taught your teams how to take ownership? You're delegating to them, but are they ready? Have they been skilled up? Are they enabled for this? Is the environment around them ready for this? And sometimes it's not even the individuals in place. Like, they're ready to take ownership, but as soon as you hit a decision outside like a certain core, it's got to be escalated. So if you can only make like 2 out of 10 decisions and the other 8 have to be escalated, do I really have ownership of this at all? What does this mean to me? So the environment's not set up for this either. So this would be, I think, one of the first major issues where where leaders in organizations get it wrong. The second is around change leadership. And a lot of leaders treat change as a project to be completed. Right? And if we look at many of the change management frameworks, ADKAR, Kotta, ProSci, they're all based on the work of Kurt Lewin from 1947. It's all built around this idea of we can unfreeze the organization, make the change, and then freeze it. And then freeze it again. But the problem is that organizations are changing so quickly. There are so many changes happening simultaneously and in parallel that change it's a skill set that has to be developed. across the board. And a lot of leaders, they either delegate, they outsource change to a change team or a transformation team, but they don't hold it themselves. They don't have those skills. So I would say that that would be another very common lack is the ability for leaders, right, to actually lead an organization, lead their area through change, and through continuous and constantly changing change. If I can overload my words there, I will also I'll add to this the issue of burnout, specifically in relation to change. I mean, burnout has many other triggers as well, but that is a major one. One of the problems we see in organizations all around the world is that if the systems of the organization, like the structure, the system, the way the organization is put together is rigid, right? Then when a change occurs, right, the impact of that actually flows through this rigid system into the people of the organization. They absorb the stress of change because the system cannot absorb the stress of change. And that is a huge problem for organizations and in the design of organizations around the world. And leaders are at fault for creating these highly rigid systems. And so the burnout, I like to say burnout is a design choice. I mean, that's simplistic and somewhat hyperbole. I mean, there are other factors there, but for a lot of people and a lot of organizations, burnout can be avoided, and that overwhelming overload of change can be absorbed by the organizational system. It doesn't have to be absorbed by the people, but it's just designed wrongly.
And that's all on the leaders to control. And so with that in mind, right, how would you recommend leaders balance the whole the speed topic, right, with thoughtful decision making?
Well, so I don't think that's a balance. I think they both can occur. I think that one of the key factors is around understanding risk. And most leaders don't understand risk. Most organizations don't understand risk. Risk is to be avoided, right?
Yes.
Every time you see a decision being made by a committee, it's because, and I mean, sorry, again, this is hyperbole, but all those committees are because it's psychologically unsafe for a leader to make a decision. And so if everybody makes the decision, nobody can be blamed if the decision was wrong. And when we look at sort of advanced organizations, mature, agile organizations, those with high levels of business agility, you have leaders who can make decisions. They still consult, they still share, and there's still transparent. And transparency is key. You have to have transparency. But that leader goes, the level of risk here is acceptable. I can accept that risk. I can make that decision. I will make that decision. And if I make the wrong decision, it will change. Right? Because the systems of the organization allow me to change the decision tomorrow when new information emerges. And that's unfortunately very rare.
Yeah, totally agree with you on that. And so to close this out then, one final question for you. What gives you optimism about the future of business agility? Well,
I am generally a very optimistic person, but ultimately I think there is a massive generational change sweeping the world. I think that the demands and the expectations of the next generation of leaders coming into organizations is very different to the generation who currently sits in the seats of power. And what gives me hope is that my daughter, who's about to turn 14, is going to have that voice to say, no, what you're doing today is rubbish. It doesn't work. And her voice can be heard in, well, let's do it differently. Let's try something new. And we're already seeing that.
I completely agree with you. I feel like this generation is fearless and definitely more adaptive to change. So exciting times ahead. And this has been a fascinating conversation because it reminds us that agility isn't really just about the process. It's about how organizations behave when conditions become uncertain. So a huge thank you to you, Evan, for sharing these insights and research perspectives with us today.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Great to have you. And to everyone listening, if this conversation sparked new thinking around leadership, adaptability, AI, or organizational resilience, make sure you subscribe, share the episode, and continue the conversation with your teams. We'll see you in the next episode.